Let's look at what we learned during COVID. What have we learned as a society, or what should we have learned? What did you learn? Let me give you a couple of things just to start.
Started, yeah.
Family. Family is more important than any of us thought.
And you shouldn't be allowed to see them.
Yes.
that I learned.
So family is just the center of everything, and we waste a lot of time on stupid stuff.
Yes, I agree with that, yeah.
All right, so there's number one. Number two, we should make our own medicine.
Yeah, that maybe our own masks, maybe our own PPE, some of that stuff that should be around. Ventilators should be available. We shouldn't be like, hey, China, please.
Okay.
That's not a good policy.
Okay, what else?
I think we've learned that things aren't as stable as we believe they were.
How do you mean?
I don't think anyone in America really believed that we could just shut down for months on end, right? I don't think anyone believed that. You see these things break out in China, and you're like, all right, SARS, and it comes and it goes, and there's everyone, there's that freak out element, and you kind of dismiss it. And I think, the idea that one day, legitimately one day, I was at an NBA game, and 3 days later, the entire society was shut down. That is something that is before this, didn't really believe was anything other than a real outlying possibility.
So you're saying maybe that our freedom is less stable.
Our freedom, our civilization is less stable. Forget what COVID is, right, for a second. Let's just say it was as deadly as MERS instead of COVID. Let's say it wasn't. Let's say it was as transmissible as COVID is, but as deadly as MERS is. This is our entire society is over. Our civilization is over in that circumstance. We wipe out 25% of the population.
So
right?
I think that's also
the outbreak. The movie situation is something that we can't plan for per se, but you realize is an outlying possibility, more than an outlying possibility. And what happened with because I also said this on the air on this show when it was happening in Italy. There's no way the United States of America would put up with what's going on in northern Italy with the shutdowns. There's no way. And then there was a way.
And there was a way.
And then all of a sudden there was a way.
Yeah.
So I think that American spirit, which would resist those types of things, is not as plentiful as I had imagined.
Okay, so let me give you, I just made some notes while you were talking. I would say family. Make our own medicine, ventilators, you said PPE. We're not as stable as civilization or freedom, society. Life is precious. It could be over quickly. Sure. I added there is the corruption thing is worse than we thought it was.
Yep.
And we can teach things to the government that possibly we shouldn't teach.
Right.
Okay.
I will say that the government will never let a crisis go to waste.
Yes.
That is one I think we kind of knew, but even, I don't know.
Let's say government has its own goals.
Yes. Okay. That's fair.
All right. So let me ask you something. If these are the things that we've learned, how many, by the way, I would add another one. We need to work.
Yeah.
Might be nice to stay at home, but if we don't work, things are going to fall apart.
We don't handle it very well.
We don't handle it well, okay? And the supply chain is falling apart, partly because can't get anybody to drive, can't get anybody to work at the docks. California is one of the ones that's really backed up. Why? Because it's California, okay? You can't go to work. All right. So family, that's a personal thing. Let's look at the government things. Make our own medicine and PPE. Is anything in the infrastructure bill doing any of that?
You'd think it would be, I don't want to say the only thing it's doing, but close to it, right?
Yeah.
You'd think that's what it would be doing. But no, not really.
Okay. Are they
enough.
doing anything? Because that is make our own medicine and vents and PPE, but really look at the breakdown of our society. Shouldn't we make steel more than we're making? Shouldn't we? Aren't there certain things that we should be working on with our infrastructure that we say, you know what? As a society, we should all think, you know what? Let's put some more money into alluring businesses.
Yeah,
here.
Because the argument for a lot of these things is it's an inefficient way of doing it. But having it here, it's expensive. It takes sometimes it takes longer.
Mm-hmm.
We're not as good at putting our people to work at 914 hours a day and all of that. But I think the motivation there is when efficiency is not the most important thing, you should be able to do it. Right? When you don't have to worry about like if you're building military vessels, saving a few dollars building it in China, not a good idea.
Not a good
right?
idea.
So the more important concern is not efficiency.
Okay, so I'm looking at the government and what they're doing. Seeing that they are pushing for higher wages, unions, which always lead to more costs, taxes are going up, and regulation is going up. I don't think we're working on that one.
Yeah,
I think we're doing the opposite.
We're doing the opposite.
We're doing the opposite.
It's worse than not doing it.
We need to work. We're doing the opposite. The
Right.
government is doing the opposite.
Funding you to avoid it.
Right. We're not as stable as a civilization or society. They are pushing us against each other just on vaccines alone. They are
race and
race
gender
and
and everything else.
January 6th versus BLM, right? At the meantime, not as stable, I added freedom into that too. We realize our Constitution and our Bill of Rights, nobody's paying attention to it.
Yeah, I mean the famous Reagan, freedom is only one generation away from disappearing. I mean I'm butchering the quote, but that concept. You thought about that with like the Soviet Union Cold War context,
Correct.
right? Like you realize how many other things also threaten it.
Correct. Life is precious. We're really arguing about people not having the vaccine that can go out and just kill people. Innocent people. Just kill them. At the same time, we're having the argument that abortion is a blessing. Abortion should happen more often.
It's healthcare, Glenn.
Corruption. Yeah. Is there anything in these $3.4 trillion bills that will help fight corruption?
Oh, I thought you were going to say help corruption. There's a lot in there.
It'll help corruption.
Yeah. When you spend $3.4 trillion, it always helps corruption.
Right. Government has its own goals. So with these things in mind, that these are the important lessons that we've learned, why aren't any of these things in the most important bill to ever pass in Congress?
Because it's got nothing to do with those things. But these are long-term Democratic goals to help them.
Progressive goals.
Yes. The Democratic Party, though, being the one that typically is more aggressive, and I don't want to say the only one doing it, but more aggressive in furthering those goals and also increasing their own power. So, yes, I would say that the way, as is always the case, the way we're dealing with this is going to make it worse because that's what we do.
It is what we do. Now, that was why we argued against TARP. Now, if you recall, I was for TARP for about 2 days because I talked to people who were in the room the night that it was proposed. And then I realized, oh, wait a minute, but this is not to give us time to prepare. This is their fix, and the fix is in. And that's a really bad thing. If it was to give us a few weeks to be able to hold things together and prepare for impact. That's one thing. This isn't that, and it's going to make things worse. We're now much worse off than we were in '08 because the Fed is completely out of ammunition. If there is a crash now, there is nothing left the federal government can do except massive change. And I mean massive change like getting rid of the dollar. If we get rid of the dollar, that means we are no longer the world's reserve currency, which means your dollar is worthless. We're Venezuela. Now, there's a couple of things that I want to address because I was on Megyn Kelly's show on Friday. And she said something along the lines of, don't you think that sometimes your predictions, you scare me to death. And maybe sometimes they're full of hyperbole. And I said, actually, no, I don't think that. I think my timing is just really off. And so you get really scared and you think, Marxists are not going to take over the United States and they're not going to be marching in the streets with red flags. And here they are. We're not on the edge of losing our Constitution or our country to Marxists. Yes, we are. How could Marxists and capitalists work together? Well, they are. And so when I say them, they are so far out of anybody's radar. Nobody's talking about it. So when it doesn't happen right away, what happens is that normalcy bias is chipped away bit by bit as you get closer to that line. And it's a really bad, dangerous place to be where you are just slowly boiled because you lose perspective on how big of a change it is. We are actually in the new normal now. We've accepted the new normal. The new normal involves things not being on the shelves, having to wait months and months and months for something that you ordered, your favorite restaurant, local, out of business, that the government is now in bed with large corporations and they're picking winners. That's the new normal. And I'm going to explain, give me 1 minute, I'm going to come back and explain why the new normal is so dangerous, especially when it comes to your dollar. So I've been telling you to prepare with more urgency recently about the economy, and know that I am always bad with timing, but it feels like it could happen tomorrow. Might happen in 5 years from now, but it feels very close because we are denying certain things. The Washington Post just did an article. The U.S. economy continues to soar while American politics craters. The troubles of a company that nobody ever heard of now have people worried about another global economic crisis. Evergrande is a property developer in China with dubious distinction of being the world's most indebted real estate company with outstanding loans of more than $300 billion. But China's fundamental growth trajectory is slowing. It's an export-driven model and has become much harder to sustain as wages have risen, making it less competitive, blah, 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 blah. China is growing old. So what they're saying here is there's no reason to worry about China because China has all of these problems. Yes, it does. It does. It has a ton of problems. The problem here is this argument from the Washington Post trying to make America sound like we're roaring back to life. No, because the article, it goes from China to then Germany. Germany's got all of these problems, blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's great. That's great. The problem here is that the United States is not roaring back to life. We're just trying to get to where we were, and we're having a hard time getting to where we were a couple of years ago. That's not roaring back to life. We need to innovate. We need to change things. Everything we are now building with the government's help in the opposite direction. We're becoming a more oppressive, more expensive country to do any kind of business in. That's not going to help America. Our reserve currency is the only reason why we are what we are. If the rest of the world decides to get out of the United States dollar, and the good news is the dollar is still strangely strong, because who else are you going to give it to? And that's the excuse that Megyn Kelly gave to me. She said, Glenn, what other country could possibly replace us? And she's right. Today, who could possibly replace us? But that is relying on, as this article in the Washington Post this weekend was trying to point out that we're so great. No, you're pointing out that other countries suck. And that's fine. But to be the least suckiest should not be our goal. And that's what's happening. We're putting our bet on that no one else will ever be better than the United States. In 1916, if I would have said to you, the United States is going to be the world's reserve currency, you would have said, the United States? The United States, it really doesn't have an industrial base, really. It's kind of a backwater country. And they don't have the gold for that. You really think that the British pound and sterling is going to fall to the United States? By 1919, they had, but the world didn't really understand it until about 1940. Why could it happen to other countries and not to us? And be blindsided by someone else when we're not concentrating on the right things, when we're not concentrating on the things that do make us strong, that did make us America, a force to be reckoned with. You dismantle all those things, someone will beat you.